You're listening to The Edge with Mark Thompson.
Hi, this is Mark, and welcome to the show. Great episode with a lot of different stuff going on. I'll give you just a quick idea of what's ahead. Michael Shure, politics and more in the Fast 15. We talk about the changing cabinet of the Trump administration with the addition of John Bolton. We talk about the gun debate, the streets being filled with young people, and actually people of all ages, but the young voices so passionately heard. We'll talk about if any real change can come, though, at the end of all that. I'll ask Michael, as a veteran political journalist, about gerrymandering, the redrawing of districts, and whether that's going to be so dramatic and severe that the Democrats, regardless of how excited they are simply going to be unable to retake much control. And we touch on the new TV channel, the Scientology channel. So there's a little something for everything, and that's just with Michael Shure. Then it's Broadway theater with Marc Acito. He wrote, I'm going to call it the George Takei Broadway musical Allegiance. It's playing in L.A. right now. And Marc Acito's an interesting guy because he's working on some other stuff too. So that conversation, about 15 minutes or so with Mark, just to give us a snapshot of the writer's life. And then literally, I think it's only about 5 minutes, we talk about Sam Simon, who it's the anniversary of his death, and he was a friend of the show and a dear friend of mine and worth a word or two about. And we play two brief clips with Sam talking, and they're funny, and you'll get a kick out of those. And then we finish the show with a man who does amazing work. He goes to Asia and rescues dogs from the dog meat trade in Asia. It's a grim but important thing that he does. What are these festivals? The Yulin Festival, which is a festival dedicated essentially to the torture, mutilation, and consumption of dogs. It's amazing. By the way, these dogs are people's pets. They're often taken from people's homes. It's not just once in a while. Like, that's the thing over there. And I even ask him about why that is. So we'll get into that. And then this will surprise you. It's going on in this country. If you're listening in the United States, we talk with Marc Ching about all of that. The good news on this is that Mark is helping to close down many of these dog meat factories, and he's bringing back so many of these dogs that had been earmarked for torture and slaughter. I also ask him about why do they torture the animals? I mean, that's just, the cruelty here is unspeakably bad. We get into all of that, and Marc Ching is heroic in what he does, and you'll hear from him coming up in this episode. So that's a little user's guide as to what's ahead. Stitcher, for some reason, did not post our last episode, and I'm sorry, Stitcher listeners. We did all we could. As you know, I have limited resources to throw at this. I don't have a full-time guy on this to lean on Stitcher and to open up the hood and see what happens. So if you want to catch that episode, we talked to the creator of Reno 911 and Night at the Museum, and it's really a great conversation with Ben Garant. You'll have to go to another platform. We're on YouTube, we're on Overcast, we're on iTunes, we're in a lot of different places, but for some reason, Stitcher glitched, and there's just no way. We tried reposting it, we tried all of those things, but Stitcher is just not able to post that episode for some reason that has to do with a technical element that I'm just not familiar with. You can support this show by doing your Amazon shopping through our website. There is an Amazon banner. You'll see it, a little Amazon stamp here and there, and if you click on that, that'll take you to Amazon. It's the same Amazon you would normally be on, but because you click through our website, we get a little piece of whatever you spend. As a result, it helps us do things like get a webmaster, get a technical guy who can then talk to Stitcher and lean on Stitcher more and get the episodes posted promptly. No one makes any money on this podcast. I will never make $1 on it, and if this podcast ever ran in the black, if we ever started making money, I would donate all that money to charity. This show is not about making money. It's just about sharing some interesting conversations with you, our audience. I'm out of time. Otherwise, I was going to share some negative email and some positive email. I'll do that in the next episode. Thanks again for being here. Let's get started.
This is The Edge.
The advantage, it means.
Hey, look, I just spit on me for no reason.
That's horrible.
Is there some comfort in uncertainty, do you think?
You're a degenerate.
Because Australian Shepherds need action.
Wow. Yeah.
This is The Edge.
That's a self-loathing term that I use.
Oh, got it.
Time for the Fast 15, politics and more. He is Michael Shure, everybody.
Hello. Good to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, thanks. Thanks so much.
I am wanting to get to a bunch of different stuff. I don't really know. I'm going to start. I know everybody wants me to start with Stormy Daniels, but
I bet there are a lot of people who don't want you to start with Stormy
Daniels. Well,
Daniels.
I'm one of them.
Maybe even more.
I don't want to start with Stormy Daniels, so I'm not going to start with Stormy
It's
Daniels.
your show.
I want to start with John Bolton because
Click.
A lot of people don't want you to start with John Bolton. Just for a second, though, I hear a lot of stuff about John Bolton being dangerous. He's certainly hawkish. He still defends the Iraqi war, and he believes that the Iran nuclear deal and the president both believe the Iran nuclear deal is bad. He also doesn't support negotiations in North Korea. He believed in a preemptive strike of some kind, military strike on North Korea because of their saber rattling and because of their ambitions vis-a-vis nukes. So against that backdrop, how many of these concerns are legit?
I think they're all legit. I mean, if you're concerned about those things and you're opposed to those positions, he holds those. That's not presumed. Those are positions he has held publicly. So if that concerns you, it's legit. If it's something you agree with, then you embrace it because it's legit. But I do think that his temperament was such that when he was nominated to be the UN ambassador, he wasn't confirmed by the Senate. I think there's a chance this Senate doesn't confirm him. And I think you're right. I think that what the president has done is he's put people around him now who agree with him, as opposed to, and then listen, James Mattis is still there, but Rex Tillerson listened, H.R. McMaster, they were both proponents of the Iran nuclear deal, which is that one piece of legislation that wasn't really legislation, that one deal that was struck by the Obama administration that is stuck in the craw of many Republicans. Ted Cruz, I've heard him say it dozens of times in front of me in states all over the place. The first thing I'm going to do is tear up that deal because there are people who don't like that deal.
By the way, though, that deal is not just with the U.S. Britain, Germany, France, Russia, China, they're all part of that deal.
That's correct. I believe on May 12th, because of John Bolton, that the United States is going to be out of that deal.
Wow, that's going to have a tremendous effect on this country, not only in terms of its relationship with Iran, but its relationship with the rest of the world, just for the reason I mentioned, those countries that we are in that deal with. And by the way, all indications are the Iranians are following this deal.
Right, and how do you know if it's working unless you give it a shot, right? And giving it a shot is not giving it a shot for the months that they've given it a shot for, even if it's 20 months, right? Here's the other thing. It's going to have a tremendous effect on fill in the blank. You just said it. I've said it I don't know how many times about so many things. I don't know when the tremendous effect happens, meaning that there's so many things that this administration does where I think, oh my God, this is going to be devastating for X, Y, or Z. It hasn't really been devastating in the ways that I predicted that things would be devastating in the way he legislates.
Well, it's in the aggregate that these things happen also. It could be it's a drip effect.
Right.
And for example, since we're talking about the Iran nuclear deal, we pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. Let's assume that the president then goes to North Korea or wherever they go. I mean, he may not go physically there, but he goes to this negotiation with North Korea about them disarming or dissembling their nuclear program. And he wants a deal there. Well, the other nuclear deal you just made, you're now backing out of. In other words, America is no longer really an honest broker to any kind of deal.
That's right.
I think that's the sort of ripple effect.
It has a ripple effect. And also, who knows if the North Koreans have said that they don't want to disassemble any of their nuclear. They look at it as a victory of their nuclear program that they've gotten America to sit down with them.
They're not wrong.
And they're not wrong. The United States can say it is our hard line with them and our sanctions that have gotten them to sit down with us. They might not be wrong either. But the point is, they both could be a little right, and there's no reason to think that either would give up the other. There just doesn't seem to be that reasoning. I don't see how Bolton helps that conversation.
Stormy Daniels, she did an interview
with Anderson Cooper.
Right.
You know, here's what I couldn't say. Anderson Cooper interviewed Karen McDougal, the other woman, the former Playboy playmate who allegedly had an affair with the president, and interviewed Stormy Daniels as well. And these are things that you can say on a podcast, maybe, but you can't say on Twitter. I don't know why. But I said it would be great if we called Anderson Cooper the Whore's Whisperer. But I couldn't tweet it. And it also, the reason is because neither of them are, right? I mean, one woman was in a 10-month relationship with a man that she was attracted to. The other woman was a woman who, had sex with a very powerful man and was not paid for it, but was paid for her silence. Neither were paid for it. But I just liked that.
Yeah, it's funny.
Thank you. Thanks. That's all I know. No, so the Daniels interview, Anderson Cooper, I thought did a really good job. You do need somebody who's calm and easy to speak to in something like that. I mean, Barbara Walters did it in different ways and others do as well. But listen, I think that what you would expect to be the feature of this story is not the feature of the story. The porn star and the wealthy man are not the the wealthy married men are not the features of the story. The feature of the story is that Michael Cohen, the lawyer, paid $130,000 for silence, and there's no trail of where that money came from, and there's no reporting it as a campaign violation, a campaign expense. And there's also the fact that the president, that means, is somewhat susceptible to blackmail of some sort.
All right. First of all, the sex stuff so doesn't interest me with any of these guys. I don't care what senator, president, or any is screwing anyone. I don't care if he's married or not. If they're two consenting adults. If this were a rape or if this were a sexual harassment, that would be
neither
different.
of these were not Me Too moments, as Stormy Daniels said, which is, in point of fact, an important distinction she made, because she didn't want to be associated with people who were really doing something for the good of the world. She's just coming out and saying this because she was threatened. I'm interested in it. I'm interested in if I find out that the president or the candidate was sleeping with a porn star, but I'm interested in it for a moment. I'm not interested in an enduring way. I am interested in the campaign finance violation. I am interested in the notion that he is subject to blackmail, and he's somebody who has, whether his lawyers or not, has paid someone off for their silence. That matters to me.
Listen, if it's true, it seems sort of manifestly true that she got a check for $130,000,
right,
and it came from his camp. So we kind of I give you the if, it's sort of in quotes, but I'll use it again. If it's true and it was a campaign violation, let's be clear. It's a fine and nothing more. It's not some big gotcha, okay, let's get this guy out of office.
Right.
It just doesn't lead to any sort of real
Except that where
repercussions.
did that money come from? Michael Cohen is also reportedly tied to a lot of the Russians. He was sent as an envoy. I mean, there are reasons to follow this guy, so it does come back a little bit. If she got money that was somehow procured from Russia, this is hypothesis, and nothing has been said like this specifically, but I mean that's why you have to follow these things. That they will take you somewhere. I interviewed Ken Starr, the former prosecutor, last week, who said, well, this investigation seems to be meandering, going off in different places. Look, Judge Starr.
He said that?
Yeah.
This is Ken Starr, who led the Clinton investigation and
on a real estate deal,
and meandered to
ended
what?
up on a blue dress. And I said that. I said, you started a real estate investigation to the death of Vince Foster, and you ended up with a blue dress. And, and he kind of defended that and said that, they just have to make sure that they stick true to their mission. He also did have a little bit of a different charge as a prosecutor rather than a counsel. So there's something different.
Where can we see that interview?
You can see it on i24news.tv. It'll be archived there for a few weeks.
Great. Not a big fan of Ken Starr because he covered up rapes at Baylor without question. To me, he has blood on his hands.
There are a few Americans I like less than Ken Starr. No one could be lovelier than he was to me. He was candid. He was open. He was delightful.
Give me an example of his candor.
There was nothing I couldn't ask about. Everything I asked, he answered. He had answers that I didn't necessarily agree with. He came from a position on certain things that I didn't agree with, but he was really frank. What's taken so long with Mueller? Mueller won't be fired. Trump will serve out his term. My regret is that I shouldn't have taken that job. I shouldn't have said yes. That's my regret. I mean, he didn't have any limitations. Afterwards, when we were done, he said, I'm not supposed to say this, but that was really fun. I mean, he was very, very nice.
Sounds to me like you can be plied with a few compliments.
Right. Well, but that was after the interview. There was no complimenting before. And listen, everyone who knows me knows how much I despise what he did for this country. And
did you say that to him on the way out?
No, I
By
didn't.
By the way, loved it. I had fun too. By the way, despise what you did for this country. All right, see you next time.
He asked for a picture with me. How about that?
Wow.
He said, let's take a picture. It's interesting because a lot of the people you meet who you don't like are actually nice people.
There is a huge show of support for gun legislation and some kind of change in the way guns are treated in this country by many teenagers and high school age kids.
For sure.
Taken to the streets. But they were joined by people of other ages and across cities and counties and small towns even across America.
Yeah.
What happens with that? I mean, as you know, I'm quite cynical and I feel nothing's going to happen.
Well, I think the most encouraging thing I saw all weekend long was the next day on Sunday, which is Sunday the 25th, David Hogg, who's one of the sort of prominent Parkland students, tweeted out, okay, folks, now the work begins. It's like we had our march, We had our moments of silence. We had our walkouts. Now the work begins. That's the first time you've heard that this far after a tragedy like the ones we've experienced. So these things have a news cycle, and what they're essentially saying is this news cycle is beginning now. It's not ending now. If they're able to keep that momentum going, which it seems like they should be able to, then that's great. The civil rights movement didn't end when Rosa Parks was allowed to sit on the front of the bus, right? It kept going because it was about voting rights. They kept marching. They kept registering voters in Mississippi. So that was in 55. Freedom Summer in Mississippi was in 64. It's 9 years from when Rosa Parks, wouldn't give up her seat to when they had young kids coming down from the north to register voters in Mississippi for the summer. That matters. And so if they're able to allow this to have some life for a while and they're young and they're inspiring, then it's limitless.
They said more than one time, look, we're the voters of the future. We're going to make a difference, and we're going to vote you guys out if you don't begin to pay attention to this, to some kind of responsible gun legislation.
Right.
That brings me to the elections and the midterms and the future of this country with regard to elections. Democrats are over the moon because with that generic ballot, they lead in ways and in places that they'd never led before. The problem with the election, it would seem, is gerrymandering that's gone on in key states and key districts.
Right.
So even if they win by these predicted margins, which are usually around 11% or less, but those are incredible numbers in some of these spots.
Look, they took over the House in 2006 by winning 6% more,
The idea is that these districts have been redrawn so severely that it doesn't matter, Democrats, you're not getting it back.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't say it doesn't matter Democrats. They just have to have wider margins than they've had in the past. And there's
unprecedented wide margins.
There's everything to indicate that they're going to have those wide margins. The problem is these purple states that can, in wave elections, they create the waves, right? So those are neither Democrat nor Republican necessarily, more unpredictable.
Like Ohio, Michigan, North Carolina?
Yeah, I would say those states, certainly Ohio and North Carolina, and Michigan, less so, but yes. What happens in those purple states is they're the ones that create the wave, right? Because the red states are going red and the blue states are going blue mostly for their delegations. It's when those move. So you have to get those percentages up. And because of gerrymandering, I don't know if you know this about Ohio, right? Democrats could win four congressional district by winning 6% of the vote, but to win that fifth congressional district, they have to win something like 55%. But by 50, they have to win by a huge margin, and that's not entirely verbatim, but it's a huge margin to get to that fifth district, which would create the wave. And Ohio was redistricted. Redistricting in this country is a very complicated thing because it's hard to say where congressional districts should be and how they should be drawn. Republicans have tried to draw them as they've won state houses, as was their mission to win state houses, win the governors, win the legislatures, and then redraw those districts to protect themselves, to put as many Democrats, as many blue voters into Democratic districts so that there's no sort of spillover into Republican districts where they could do damage. This was essentially done to prevent a wave election against the Republicans and for the Democrats. So there's no cure to it other than the fact that the court is saying, no, you can't do it that way. And the way you're proposing to redistrict, as they've done in Pennsylvania, is not constitutional. We cannot do that. But on the other side, there's nobody who's come up with a cure to how redistricting should happen because they have these commissions and they're supposedly bipartisan, but who do you know that's bipartisan?
Right. We become so politically charged.
Yeah.
But there's a neutrality about redistricting, I believe, in California and New York, where they have these commissions in California, and they've got something like a state master or a general man, whatever they call him, who handles
a special master.
Special master, right, in New York.
But where's the special master? Is he a Democrat? Republicans wouldn't want him there, right? I mean, you know what I'm saying? That it's the only way to do it is along geographical lines, and then geographical lines don't give you, it's the House of Representatives. They don't give you equal representation to the population because, those geographical lines, you could have 14 people and then draw a line that's even, and then you have 474,000 people. So it's hard to say.
Did you see that the Church of Scientology has their own network now, television network?
I did see that,
Yeah.
I'm moments away from working for them.
I'll be doing the weather, actually, on Good Morning Suppressives. The suppressives are the bad people who don't accept it, I think.
What do they call themselves, too? Commodores or admirals? Or...
Yeah, it's based on the Sea Org.
Yeah,
is a
the
big
Sea
part
Org,
of it.
yeah.
Scientology, and I've known a lot of Scientologists. I used to play in a card game in Hollywood with some very high profiles, regularly.
Right.
And it started as kind of a self-help thing. It still does, I think, start that way. But
every cult does.
That's right. I suppose that's true. And you can argue every religion is a cult. Every religion starts that way.
You can, but I think these break-off cults that are slightly, I agree with you, Mark. But they're about a deity usually rather than a living person.
Okay. But that doesn't make them better.
It doesn't, but I'm not defending them. But what I'm saying is, like, you look at Jim Jones. Those were people who were looking for self-help, and they moved to Guyana, and they killed themselves because he said so. It doesn't make it better, but it's people giving. There's a difference, I think, in casual worship and wanting to believe in God, and actually giving everything in your life, financially and personally, over to that. I think that's what cults seem to get people to do, is to break away from their families and their friends and, immerse themselves inside of these cults.
That is a huge distinction. So, if you can't leave a church or a system of belief without losing your family or
your life in some cases.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. But if you can't join without it either, that's what a lot of these cults do. They program you to break away from your family because your families are going to want to talk you out of it. And they don't want that. So it's not just leaving without any kind of punishment. It's joining in the first place without it. And so listen, I'm not a believer, but I'm envious of people who are sometimes. I'm casually religious and have some sort of spiritual relationship, but that's very different than what Scientology is.
I believe all the help that anyone is going to need is going to come here on this podcast. So
stop talking to your families and start listening to the show.
Go back and listen to every episode. But first, click on the Amazon link, because that's the way you can support this show with your regular Amazon purchases. By the way, we'll talk about Amazon next time you're here.
Okay.
I love having you here. Thank you very much for a ride through current events. Ladies and gentlemen, he must go, but he'll be back. He's Michael Shure.
Oh, thank you. I will be. Thank you.
If you enjoy listening to The Edge, support them by subscribing to The Edge on iTunes, Stitcher, and you can listen through the iHeartRadio app. Get busy listening.
And now he's written the Broadway show that is now in Los Angeles called Allegiance. Marc Acito joins us by phone.
Mark with a K calling Mark with a C. Hello.
Hello, Mark with a K. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, you sound great. I'm here with Laura House, comedian, performer, and writer. And I'm here also with J.Elvis Weinstein, Josh, who's a documentary filmmaker and a comic. And both of them, as comedians, say inappropriate things occasionally.
Only occasionally.
Bring it on.
That's not our mission in life.
Speak for yourself.
Marc Acito is a playwright and an accomplished writer whose show Allegiance is here in Los Angeles. Now, this show Allegiance, Mark, is based on the stories that came out of the life of George Takei, whose fame really, I guess, comes from Star Trek, right?
And now, king of the universe on the internet.
Yes.
Yeah, right. It is cool that, use the word cool. I just think it's great when celebrity status can permit him to tell this story. It's a very important story to be told.
If you ask George what his life's purpose is, he will tell you to form a more perfect union. It's absolutely been the focus of his life, and this project is his legacy project. This is his mission, to make sure that the story of the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II is told, because George Takei and his family were among the 120,000 Japanese Americans who were incarcerated during World War II simply because they looked like the enemy.
Yeah, and one of the things that's weird is you sit there and watch this, because you get a sense of this, like these concentration camps that they had where they recently uprooted families and put them there, just as Mark says, because they looked like the enemy, looked like the Japanese who just had bombed Pearl Harbor. One of the things you get is that the whole thing happened quite suddenly differently to them. They're thinking, oh, we're Americans. We can't wait to enlist. We can't wait to do, to close ranks behind our country. They're born in America, many of them. But the United States government was having none of that. Scooped them all up, and they had to give up their property and all the rest. In other words, there are aspects and details of this that are quite painful.
Well, and really so relevant now because of all of the very heated America First rhetoric that has returned. You're absolutely right. I mean, December 8th of 1941, 1,000 Japanese American leaders were arrested and detained immediately. And that was something, just for, let's say, running a Japanese school, or for running a martial arts club or something. I mean, they were immediately under suspicion. And, all 120,000 of them were in camps by August of 1942. So just imagine, right now, a year from now, a segment of the population being rounded up and put into camps. It's mind-boggling, as you say, how quickly it happened.
Also, the thing that I'm going to confess I didn't really focus on ever as I knew about this dark period was that they gave up their homes, their businesses. They were bought out for a dime on a dollar. You're going away. Your business is closing. I don't care that it's worth whatever. I'm going to give you $2 for it, and you're going to take it. And they had no choice. Their livelihoods were destroyed as well.
It's actually the reason why we have Chinese fortune cookies.
Oh.
Fortune cookies were actually a Japanese-American invention. And during the internment, whoever had fortune cookie factories was not there to make them. So the Chinese moved in. And, it's neither authentic to either Japan or China, FYI. But it was something that then the Chinese picked up and continued. And when the Japanese came back, no one returned to it.
Oh, no.
So isn't that bizarre?
That is really bizarre.
Yeah. And, the dark chapter, but I want to say our focus on the story is on the fortitude and the incredibly gracious, forgiving, positive attitude that the Japanese Americans had during this period. I was brought on to work on the project in 2012. It had already been in development for a couple of years. And when I found out the following fact, it told me exactly what the story was. And the fact that I'm going to share is that during the war, when these Japanese Americans were sent to these camps, they were sent to the most remote, desolate parts of the country, in the center of the country, in the desert mostly. And these were farmers, and really good farmers. They were able to grow such a surplus of crops that they donated them to the American military.
Wow.
So the metaphor there of that gesture, first off, to be able to bloom where you're planted, literally, and then to have the fortitude and the grace to be able to turn around and bestow a gift upon your oppressors, says so much about the character of the Japanese American community. It's been such a privilege, as a white guy, to pay this story.
The music for this show was done, and then they called you in to write the story?
The show was already in development. It had a story that was processed. It had songs that were in process. But the creators of the show, Jay Kuo, who wrote the music and lyrics, and Lorenzo Cione, who is the lead producer on Broadway, the two of them had crafted a book. And really, we're looking for somebody who was a working playwright to be able to join the team. So before the first production, I came in and helped shape the story from there.
I really enjoyed the show, and I can't recommend it
Thank
enough.
you.
Our time is so limited. I want to get to just a couple of things real quick, because I don't think we've had a playwright on the show before. So I want to quickly ask you.
What's a play?
Quick question.
At intermission, is it bad to take your concessions back in with you? You've adapted other works, like you've done some stuff. I was reading about you, and you've got some really kind of cool things that you've worked on. Two questions. One is, just give us a snapshot of what that's about, like how you do that. Is it the same way you do a movie, like you have to get investors and all that sort of thing, or you?
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I'm actually preparing to make my first movie myself. I have a piece called Bastard Jones, which is an adaptation, as you mentioned, of Henry Fielding's The History of Tom Jones, which was made into a film with Albert Finney in 1963, won Best Picture. And it's a story that I thought was very much for our times in terms of talking about second-class citizens. And it's a sex farce about human rights. And in answer to your question about investors, it would actually be less expensive to do an independent feature than it would be to try to do an off-Broadway show.
Wow.
Or develop a Broadway show. Yeah, my Broadway show can cost you 10 to 12 to 16, 20 million. You can make a decent movie for less than $1 million. So I'm going to direct my first feature.
Oh, that's terrific.
Branch out that way.
To save money.
Yeah, you don't hear that much.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly.
Did you have a part in writing or bringing into production a show about Judy Garland, sort of her pre-Wizard of Oz days, and then after she hit the Wizard of Oz?
Yes, that's actually another piece that's in development and is looking for a Broadway run in 2019. Thank you for asking, Mark.
Oh, that's cool. So what is it called?
Minnesota Girl.
It's called, right, the Minnesota Girl, Judy Garland. It's called Chasing Rainbows. And it is about Judy Garland's adolescence. It leads up to being cast in The Wizard of Oz, and basically looks at the little-told story about her, coming from Minnesota and being. Sorry, that's my dog.
That's Toto.
It's Toto, right on cue.
Toto,
Scary.
Exactly. Well, yeah, Miss Gulch is nearby, so that's he gets so nervous.
Gets nervous every time the broom flies by the window. Yeah.
Yes, every time. Yeah, and he sees anybody on a bicycle and he thinks, oh, that's it, I'm done for. That's the thing about The Wizard of Oz that just has never made any sense, is that we get to the end and she's so happy to be home and everything's supposed to be great. And the fact is Miss Gulch is still at large.
Yeah,
and
they did leave
determined
that.
to bring that dog to the sheriff. I'm just not sure how anything has really changed.
Yeah, you know that it was pitched that this piece of dialogue, which is, Dorothy, we got some sad news. Miss Gulch died in a tornado.
We found Miss Gulch in her namesake.
That would have been it would have been clean, but just a little too dark, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose so. But you know me, I go. I managed to find comedy in an internment camp. So, and I will say that was with George's blessing and encouragement, because one of the things that he said was, he said we were, they put us behind bars, and we started a Boy Scouts troop and a baseball team, and we had dances, and people got married and fell in love, and it was the sense of humanity and the fact that they managed to laugh to be able to get their way through it, because George is very funny.
Yeah.
And that's yet another piece of that is really so inspiring to me. I mean, honestly, anytime you're feeling sorry for yourself, if you just think you're on the 405 and you're blocked up for an hour, and you think, well, no one's knocking on my door and putting me in a concentration camp, so I guess today's a good day.
Yeah, I'm the guy going, this is like the Holocaust.
If there's 4 people in front of Josh at a 7-Eleven, that's his Holocaust.
Yeah.
So we're babies. We're giant babies.
All right.
It's a great reminder, and obviously, I mean, clearly the timing of it is amazing, because so many things are happening in the past couple of years that we didn't think could happen. So it is a nice reminder of, like, you guys, seriously, like, it can get really, really bad.
Yeah.
Quickly.
Yeah. Quickly. Yeah. And so we have to stay on it, and just stay, aware. I'm not sure what it's going to take to change, turn things around, but that's
change attitudes.
I'm just sunshine and light, aren't I? I'm just bringing all of the good.
Well, but I feel like it's not your fault. Like I'm from Texas, and sometimes when I talk about the history of it's not my fault. That's what happened. Like, you're just shining a light on a horrible thing that happened. It's not, you're not the bad guy here.
Well, in this case, you do hope that by seeing this, you go, wow, it really can change that quickly, and that there is a message that then ripples out, and you can make. And look, art does change things. I mean, messages, important messages, are communicated through this art form. So I think it's a laudable effort on that level also. Not to ascribe too much importance, but I do think it's a successful job. So
better than Hogan's Heroes as far as internment camp comedy goes, I've heard.
Yeah.
What a great review. Better than Hogan's Heroes.
Well, I encourage everyone to see it, Allegiance, here in Los Angeles. And, I'm hoping that when you get some of this other stuff launched, you'll swing back by either in person or on the phone and tell us about it.
Come talk about the movie.
Yeah, maybe I'll have a landline by then.
This is good. We had a couple of pockets, but we'll lift them out. It'll be all right. So.
Oh, good. So there's not people. I was wondering.
We'll clean that all up. Don't worry.
This interview's only 2 minutes long.
Yeah, exactly.
He cuts so much out. We're barely going to get your name.
Marc, thanks so much. Good luck with the run and with other projects, and really do keep us posted, all right?
You got it, friend. Thank
all right.
you.
Okay,
Thanks.
Marc Acito,
Bye-bye.
thanks.
Oh, okay. Let me just, yeah. It's just something. There we go. Yeah. I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. And if you haven't already, why don't you show your support and subscribe? What's the matter with you? Go to Edge Show. Oh, it's Edge Dash. What's with the dash? Stupid. All right, I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. Show your support and leave something on their website, edge-show.com. Stupid. Why is there a dash?
Now, a quick moment to remember Sam Simon. It's the anniversary of Sam Simon's death. And Sam Simon was a dear friend of mine, a dear friend of our guest here, Chris DeRose. I say our guest. We're doing it in a very informal way. We're just having a conversation about this guy. And it'll only be a few minutes, but he was a pretty significant figure in society. And for that reason, I thought, man, why not just at least take a moment and recognize what he did? He obviously made a big difference in the culture through The Simpsons and through a lot of the entertainment television that he was part of. But you run an organization, Chris DeRose, called Last Chance for Animals, and he made a difference through his charitable giving with these animal organizations like yours.
Not only that, Mark, he made a difference in our attitude toward things. And we talked earlier about somebody else about setting a moral compass, and he had that. He brought groups together. We were at his home afterwards when he was still alive. And you remember all these different groups, the heads of the different groups were there. Sam was an amazing guy in more ways than one. Morally, he was right on cue with almost any issue you could think of, and certainly the animal issues, which we were really, really interested in.
He was the biggest single donor to Save the Children as well. So he wasn't purely an animal activist, although his activism was significant. He, during his time in battle with cancer, which was about 2.5 years, I think, total, after he was given 6 months to live, he lived on for a couple of years beyond that. He still showed up at rallies, and he flew to Taiji for the dolphin hunt there. And
then up to the Faroe Islands for the whale slaughter. Yeah, he was all over the place, and nothing stopped him. And as a matter of fact, I think that's what really kept him going. His passion, his love, his compassion is what really kept Sam going. He was an amazing human being, and I feel really honored to have spent a lot of time, private time with him and talking to him about different issues, and we worked on something together.
Your organization does a lot of different things, particularly with animals being stressed in so many ways globally. I mean, from the vanishing wildlife across the continent of Africa and Asia, and as it turns out, North America. I mean, there's vanishing wildlife here in the U.S. and beyond, to puppy mills and, the kind of daily stresses on animals that we experience, like dogs and cats and that kind of thing. Your organization actually has a pretty broad reach. Like, you deal with all of those things I just mentioned.
Yes, we do, and primarily, as you know, we do investigations. And right now, as we're speaking, I have 6 different people on the cover in 6 different places on 2 continents. So we're all over the place. We're a small organization, and I don't believe you have to be big in order to be effective. Somebody once phrased it that we were kind of like the Navy SEAL of the military. And we're small, we're efficient, we don't have big committees that we have to run something through. It just needs to get done, it gets done. We do it, and that's just the nature of it, just do it. So we're very effective at what we do.
And if you want to follow some of the things that are going on, like there's animal testing in labs that's heartbreaking, and there are so many things that your organization is involved with. In fact, I'd love to have you back talking about one of the biggest investigations and one of the biggest acts of, I guess, activism I can think of was you breaking into, I think the lab was at UCLA?
Yeah, it was UCLA Brain Research Institute.
And they had monkeys, and they were doing horrible things to these animals, and that stuff is still going on.
More recently, we did something up in Canada, ITR, which is a research facility that was doing monkeys, pigs, dogs, beagles, primarily. It was doing rats and mice, too, but our undercover op was working strictly out of the dog, primate, and pig facility. And we were able to get the most devastating documentation there is. to the point where MPs in Canada had no idea that this was going on. People that knew there was experiments that were going on had no idea there were dogs and pigs and monkeys, and they thought it was just rats and mice. But we were able to get exquisite documentation on it. And we're still it's been 1 year right now as we speak. It's 1 year, and we're in legal battles with them right now, and we're reinsurging all the media coverage that we had before, bringing it out to the public. Of course, there's been demonstrations nonstop for 1 year at this facility in Canada.
That's just great to hear. On Twitter, you can follow Last Chance for Animals at LC, the number 4A, at LC, the number 4A. Your website, I'll post a link to on our website, edge-show.com.
Right.
And we mentioned Last Chance for Animals. We talked to Chris DeRose because Sam Simon was a substantial donor. I think he'd want us to have a tip of the cap to those organizations that he supported and that he believed in, and yours is one of them.
Yeah, we were one of the, I guess, four. There was four main organizations that he supported, and we're one, and we're honored. You know, when I first met Sam, he had the rescue place in Malibu where they would go to a shelter, rescue some dogs, and then teach these dogs to be special service dogs.
Yeah, they retrained them in effect.
Retrained them, spayed, neutered, gave them shots, and brought these dogs back to life and gave them a purpose in life.
Yeah, these dogs were earmarked for euthanization.
Yeah, and he did an amazing job on this. And then he had his a mobile spay and neuter clinic going around to different areas where people couldn't get to a facility and didn't have the money to do it. He would spay and neuter their animals for free, and he was amazing. I mean, Sam had his hands into so many different things, and not just animals, but human projects, too. Right. He was a very philanthropic, compassionate human being.
He really made his money do good things.
Yep, he was a special, special guy.
Sam was a great tipper. Here's a funny story he told about a situation in which he found himself tipping. This is Sam Simon at Starbucks.
I was in Starbucks once. And it was crowded, and it was Christmas. And I think that is the worst job in the world, is being like the
barista.
A barista is a horrible job, and cashier is too. And the guy ahead of me, I don't know what he ordered, but it was his bill was $9.95, and he took out a $10 bill. He got a nickel change, and he held it up to the cashier and said, "I know this isn't a very big tip, but this is a magic nickel, and it's going to bring you a lot of tips." And he puts a nickel in the thing, and I thought, what a jerk. So I'm a big tipper. So I get my espresso, and I put $100 in the tip jar, and she turns to the other guy and says, "Thank you, it worked."
Oh, God. That's just too good. Too good. And Sam grew up in Beverly Hills. I don't remember exactly how this sounds, so we'll just play it. But Sam lost his dog once. I guess their dog was constantly getting into other yards and, wandering around. And here's Sam telling that story.
Our dog ran away, and one of my neighbors brought the dog back in a limo and drove up in the driveway. And he was a singer from Tupelo, Mississippi, named Elvis Presley.
Oh, geez.
Wow.
Are you serious?
Elvis found your dog and brought it back in a limo?
Yeah.
It's too good. Too good. What a guy, what a character, what a great guy. Chris DeRose, thank you for hanging out and sharing a couple of thoughts about Sam with me.
Thank you. And next time I come on, I got a couple other things I'll tell you about.
Chris will be back. I'd like to talk about all the great work you do. Until next time, Chris, we'll see you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, man. And now our conversation with Marc Ching. He goes to Asia and rescues animals from the world of the dog and cat meat trade, which is all too popular in Asia. How he does it, why he does it, and is he making a difference in the big picture? We'll find out in our discussion. Marc Ching is involved in something that has just now, I think, gotten more attention than perhaps ever before, and that's the dog meat trade in Asia. Marc, you go to Asia and you go undercover. You see these different operations, the dog meat operations, and you bring back many of these dogs. A lot of them have been tortured, and you've even shut down a couple of these operations, the illegal ones. Welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you again, Mark.
You know, there's so many different aspects of rescuing animals and getting them adopted. There's getting them off the street and scooping them up. There are distressed animals in bad weather right now in the wintertime, and there are those who rush in and get them. But the ongoing horror of the dog meat trade in Asia, it seems like an insurmountable task to gain any ground on. Yet you go back to China particularly. Now, China is responsible for, I think, a bulk of it. How many dogs are involved in the dog meat trade?
I think in China, they estimate about 30 million, which is a huge number.
And when you go over there, is the dog meat trade in the shadows, or is it like a regular market where there are chickens in one place and then dogs in the next?
Well, every country is different. So I've been to every country that has dog meat epidemic. In China is very different from, per se, Korea. In China, there are markets that most of them are government owned or funded, and they have different sections. They have the goat section, the cow section, and then they have the dog section. In China, where a lot of the activism against the dog meat trade is focused, a big majority of these dogs are stolen from people. So they're taken from their yards or from their homes and put on these trucks and driven around the country. And that's why I think a lot of people are appalled, because if somebody stole my dogs and they ended up on one of these trucks and then they ended up being tortured, that is terrible.
So you raise a couple of things in that scenario. One is, why isn't it like farming animals in our country, which is they raise these animals in horrible conditions often, but at least they're raised for food, people would say, and they then kill those animals and then eat them. Why do they need to go around to different neighborhoods grabbing neighborhood pets and killing them for food?
Well, in China and Cambodia, Laos, and every place but Korea, they don't have a dog farms, or they don't farm dogs how they would cattle or how they would lamb or different species. They, for some reason, don't. And so in China, the majority of the dogs are stolen. And so why raise dogs when you can just take them and, and they're free? In Korea, it's a little different. They have the Dog Farmers Association, and in Korea, they raise these dogs, where in China, millions of dogs are taken like monthly and stolen and eaten.
You mentioned Korea. Just for a moment, we'll note the fact that there's an Olympian skier from this country, a guy named Gus Kenworthy, and he rescued dozens of dogs from the South Korean dog meat farm. Now, apparently, this dog meat farm has been closed down, but he rescued 90 dogs. So that at least brought some attention to what's going on in Korea. But it continues to be an industry that will go on long after the Olympian has left.
It's strange because Koreans are such proud people, and before the Olympics, the government, instead of taking action to try to change what's happening there, wanted to pay individual slaughterhouse owners and dog farms and restaurants to take dog meat off their menu to hide the dog killing from the public, and most of those restaurants did not capitulate. So, this Olympics, one of the best things that happened was that a lot of attention was brought to the issue. And so I don't know who tweeted this, but there was something that I read about some athlete, maybe it was like a German or Polish athlete or someone who, when they took their medal, they talked about the dog meat trade and how terrible it was. And then he took some heat from it from older Korean people saying, you don't understand our culture. What we say to that is that, culture changes as we gain ethics or as we learn more how to be human. And the problem is, even if a dog is farmed, people's family members are ending up in these slaughterhouses. I've actually rescued dogs from slaughterhouses and dog farms in Korea that have microchips that belong to people that were stolen. And we did the reunification, and we learned how they were taken. One case in particular, they had a gated house, and somebody jumped over the fence when the dog was in the backyard peeing and just kidnapped the dog. Another case, she just went into the store to pay for gas, came out, her dog was gone out of her car. You see, and so both these dogs ended up at a slaughterhouse in Busan called Gupo, and we rescued these dogs, and both of those dogs got reunited with their parents. And so
you're Chinese?
I'm actually Korean, Japanese, adopted into a Chinese family, so it's pretty interesting.
I guess Chinese because you do so much work in China. You speak Chinese.
Well, actually, I don't speak anything other than English.
Oh, really?
And so I take translators with me into Cambodia or whatever country, Vietnam, Philippines, China, what have you. And so I use a translator.
So throughout Asia, you're working on this issue. It's not just China.
It's not just China, no. You know, from when we first started, from my first trip, which I took September 2nd, 2015, back then we just used to rescue individual dogs because I didn't know how to do anything better. In time, going to Asia so much, we learned that often that's not the answer. While you rescue one dog, there are 10 million dogs still there. And so then we started closing slaughterhouses. We started stopping these trucks in China being driven from one section to another, literally pushing them off the road with another car and taking the dogs. And now we are pushing for legislation. So in China, we're working with what's called an NPC member, which is kind of like congressional members here. In America, we have a Dog and Cat Meat Prohibition Act because you can actually eat dogs in 44 states here.
Is that right? In the United States?
In the United States, correct.
You can eat dogs in 43 states?
In 44 states.
In 44 states?
Correct. So it's, you know. And people think it doesn't happen, but it does. There was just a case in Pennsylvania. Out of all states, you would think, why there? But there was this big case there where somebody was breeding Jindus, which are Korean dogs, and selling it to, you know, Korean people who wanted to eat dogs. Hawaii is a place that has a big epidemic, and other places too. I know there's a couple cases in like Connecticut and like New York, and so, but in 44 states, it's illegal to eat and kill dogs for food.
So it's a cultural thing?
Well, unfortunately, it's, I think, an Asian issue that, and I can say this because I'm Asian, coming to America thinking that dog meat is this medicinal mystic meat where if I eat a dog and I'm sick, it has healing benefits. And so they're bringing this ideology from however they grew up, this cultural thing, and they're bringing it here. Why we're focusing on making a law here to make it illegal is a couple of things. While it seldom happens here, imagine if somebody from China comes and doesn't understand the American culture and sees your dog for whatever reason, you let it out of the house to pee in the yard, and you know it does that every day, so you don't really worry about the leash or whatever. Comes up and grabs it and then takes it to his backyard, tortures the dog, beats him up, burns him alive. And these are things that are happening, even though it is seldom. And so, you know,
so you need these laws in place to prevent that very scenario from happening, as you say, from someone presuming that this cultural thing that they do is okay, to prevent them from doing it, because it's not okay here in this country.
In our country, that's very frowned upon, and it's not okay, yes. And really, it's not okay anywhere.
Why? I mean, it's not okay. We know it's immoral. I mean, it's funny. You really get it, because I'm thinking, well, it's not okay, but you're, I guess, implying even in some of your answers, well, you can say it's not okay, but it is happening and it is legal. So in a way, we've said from a governmental standpoint that it is okay. In 44 states, it's okay. It's not okay to snatch somebody's dog from their yard, but the eating of the dog is okay, as you've just said.
And the killing of the dog in these states, correct.
Why do they torture the dogs?
So it's weird. Like, so when I first learned about, you know, I'm Asian and I grew up in Hawaii, and so I always knew that Asian people ate dogs. And not a lot of them, but I just knew it happened. And in 2015, when I first learned about the dog meat trade, I started seeing these pictures on Facebook about this Yulin Dog Meat Festival. And I am one of those people who kind of do not believe everything they read. And so I was like, that's impossible. How can anybody think that that is okay? And so I thought it was fake. And so when I actually left America to China for the first time, it was to see if it was true.
The Yulin Dog Meat Festival is in China, and it literally is a festival of dogs and dog meat eating.
They literally drive these trucks carrying 400 to 500 stolen dogs, many of them with microchips, to this city where tens of thousands of people come in on cars or subways or whatever, or trains, and they come to the city and they literally come to eat dogs. You know, this past Yulin, me and someone in my foundation named Suki, I can't speak Chinese, so she tells me, we were on this train coming into Yulin, and the people next to us, this guy was talking about how they have a special way of making the meat. So when their family eats it, they're going to have less disease. Some kind of ancestor thing will be done, and so, yeah.
So there's superstition and a tradition and a ritual, it sounds like, associated with some of this.
Hundreds of years of superstition and culture built into this dog eating type of thing. And so
why did they torture the animals?
And so when I went to China, to see what they're doing, it's pretty insane.
Because you didn't believe it.
I didn't believe it. And then when I saw it for the first time, I didn't understand. And since then, I've been to so many countries and so many regions in those countries, and every place is different. Some places don't partake in that, you see. Some places do so many dogs that they can't, and some small places do. And a lot of them think that adrenaline release makes the meat taste better. Some places in Indonesia that I've been, they said, if this dog can withstand this beating and this torture, then whoever eats that meat becomes that much stronger because that dog was so strong. And so they have many beliefs. Even I went to a island in Indonesia where they took bile, like they do the bears, out of these dogs. They would beat them, take the bile out, and people would come and they would take this bile, and they believed it cured cancer. And so there's a whole, mythical thing behind it. But the torturing of the animal first is very common.
And it's in essence that they feel in that adrenaline that's released as you torture the animal, and it's so frightened for its life, that somehow is transferred to you in a positive way as you consume the animal.
They believe that, yes.
Yeah. And that's why when you hear about dogs being boiled alive at the table, dropped into hot oil alive at the table in different restaurants in Asia, that's this thing. It's the release of the adrenaline that's then transferred to you. That's the belief.
In some regions, yes. Some regions believe that if you eat the meat, when it's really hot, it cools your body down. Some regions believe other things. In Korea, they actually have these herbs called gai soju, which I've been to a factory, and they take these little small dogs, and they kill them, and then they boil them in this pot with all these herbs, and they make it into these packets, and people drink this thinking it's going to cure them of disease. And it's such a big business out there. And I bought some of these packets. Well, not bought, but I was at a factory, so I just took some, 3 just small packets. I brought them to America, and I looked at them when I got home, and I said, there's dog feces in here, the dog's blood, all the diseases that the dog had. And they're drinking this thing like it's the best thing ever. And it's so, I just don't get it.
Right. It's completely insane. And yet this insanity continues and multiplies in such a way that it's taken over these huge areas of Asia. I mean, these traditions have taken control of many parts of Asian culture. So when you go over there for the first time, first of all, here's with you the tug of war that I imagine is just so hard, and I have it in my mind, and I'm curious for a moment. The thing that draws you over there is this sense of compassion and heart, and like you're compelled to do something. As you say, you just grabbed a handful of dogs your first time, tried to rescue them. To witness this horror and to know that you can only do a little bit, I would think must be a really difficult thing. Leave aside even knowing whether you can do a lot or a little. Just witnessing it has to be an extremely difficult thing to manage. Yet you have to manage it because you're there undercover in many instances, and it's incumbent upon you not to just lose it.
My first trip in 2015, September, I left America. I can't even speak Chinese, and I literally just had a backpack and a plane ticket. And, I'm married and have these 2 small kids. And so, first of all, my wife just thinks I'm nuts. She's like, you're going to do what? But my first experience was so great. I went out there, I rescued 50-something dogs. And it was such a great, beautiful, powerful thing that I got to back home. And I said, I'm going to go again. This time, because I made some contacts out there, I was more prepared, and I was able to plan a month in advance. Okay, there's a slaughterhouse here. Let's go there. There's here. here. So my trip went from going to dog markets, where it's kind of like, an open market where they're killing dogs, into factory slaughterhouses. And that's where everything changed, where you go from doing something that you think is great to something so terrible and so dark. I really believe that the human mind isn't made to witness such things. And for the people that slaughter these animals and have no compassion or no empathy towards them, I don't even know how that's possible.
They're damaged as well.
From that first trip, I've taken 17 trips, and they're multi-country at each trip. And I've gone into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of slaughterhouses. And even holding your composure there really isn't the thing. The hardest part is when you come back to society and you have to live amongst regular people and function and be okay with what you just saw, and knowing whatever you do cannot change that. And I think that's the hardest part about caring or being human or trying to work in something so terrible.
I would think that digesting that emotion has to be by now something that you have to have a mechanism for. Maybe it's therapy, maybe it's something, but there has to be a way for you to unload that. And for those who help you and are there witnessing that horror, they have to have that too. Otherwise, it becomes a burden you're not being fair to yourself. You know what I mean? As you say, you're probably not built to manage it yourself. So I would hope that you have some mechanism or are looking at ways to have a mechanism for you and the people who accompany you to unload that emotion, to help digest those things and that which you've witnessed.
So if you follow us on Instagram or Facebook, when I take these trips, I kind of like post in real time. I'll go to a slaughterhouse, I'll write about it, I'll rescue a dog, I'll tell its story. And even my emotional, whatever it's called, breakdown or my journey, I write about that too. And a lot of people ask, what do I do to cope with it? And really, there's nothing. It's strange because my last trip was in October, and at that time, I don't feel how I do now, but at that time, I was literally like borderline, like suicidal. I mean, that's how messed up I was. And I was so messed up that I had to step away. And I haven't gone back since. I think I'm doing a lot better. But it's strange because it's been so long, and you would think that darkness leaves you, but it doesn't. I have these two small children, and they're so great. And in the beginning, when I started this, I would take these heavy trips, and I would come back to America, and I would have to be a father. And seeing my children, it used to be that therapy, what you need to be okay with what you've seen. As my trips became harder, for whatever reason, I lost that connection to my own children. And I just became so fixated with saving these animals that it took me to the brink of where you don't want to live yourself. And, I tried therapy before, and I tried drinking, which didn't work that well.
Yeah.
And I tried a lot of things. And at the end of it all, I've come to the realization that there is no fixing it. Well, once you're aware and once you're broken so much, there's nothing you can do to change that except doing your best to be as human as possible. And I don't know when my next trip will be. I'm planning one now. But I've changed in a way to think that if I can change the law in these countries or within my own country to protect humans or animals, that itself matters. And so that's where I am now. And I'm trying to take the darkness that I've seen in everything and use that as my passion to do something bigger. And so,
I was at the Last Chance for Animals fundraiser. This is several years ago. And an animal activist was being awarded for having closed down a slaughterhouse, but it was far more complicated than that because he had to serve time because of it and all the rest. That was in this country. He wasn't even there to get the award because he was serving time and his sister was there. She said something that stuck with me, and as you were speaking, I thought of this as well, and I hope you'll appreciate it in the way, because I think you've really articulated well the kind of horror and what you've witnessed, and we all know, listening, how ridiculous this tradition is and the mythology around it, and it's just disgusting and grotesque and obscene. But as you see it, as you witness the darkness and the torturing of these innocent creatures, and as you see their eyes and look at those faces, and it's unimaginable. None of us can imagine the darkness. Back to this person on stage. She said, as we look at these things in this country, we're talking about the conditions of factory farmed animals, and we see a lot of the cruelty associated with the way we treat animals in our food system here. And we start crying, or we start shouting in anger, or we break down. She was making the point that the breakdown doesn't do those animals any good. We all feel it, and we all sympathize. But if you're trying to do something good for the animals in those factory farms, you need to somehow steel yourself after your breakdown and try to make a difference. And as you were speaking, I thought, well, what you said is you've had the breakdown. It's sticking with you because of the darkness, because of what you have witnessed. But you're now resolved to make a difference in ways that will begin to change the situation, or at least change the situation for the animals that you can touch. And it's weird, those of us who are in the animal rights movement, even to whatever extent, certain things stay with us, and certain images, certain things that are said, and that was one that stuck with me.
This past Yulin, I was in a slaughterhouse, and in the slaughterhouse we rescued, 300 dogs or something.
Wow.
And when I was
how does that happen when you say we rescued them? Do you buy them, or do you?
Well, before, I've been to a prior Yulin where we actually bought dogs because we didn't know how to do it at that time. Now we close the places down, which we don't in China. In Korea, we close slaughterhouses. And
now how do you do that?
Well, in Korea, so I just closed a slaughterhouse in October. I actually closed two. I closed an illegal one because I was taking government representatives with me into the slaughterhouse so they could witness why we need this to end.
Did you know that this one was particularly bad? That is to say, how did you know what slaughterhouse to bring these government officials to?
Oh, we just took them to any.
Wow.
Yeah. And so one didn't have a license, and so we were able to close that down based on the government official. The other one that we closed down, we gave a lot of people don't like it, but we gave the slaughter owner a new opportunity at a business that didn't involve hurting animals. And so that person is doing a coffee shop. In Cambodia, we've done vegetarian restaurants. We've done another coffee shop. We've done an automotive place where they repair cars. And so you need to do that. We just had Damian Mander on here, who, as he's awesome. The anti-poaching guy, and he was talking about how you need to provide an economic alternative for these communities. You have to, because without that, there's no place to turn. And so we have this economic development program in Asia where if a slaughterer wants to turn over, we will help them to construct a new business, and they give us their slaughterhouse, and we take all the animals and we find them homes. They usually come to the U.S., and then we help them with building the business, advertising, construing a menu for doing a coffee shop, things like that. Right now, we're working on two in Cambodia, 2 high torture slaughterhouses. One is going to do a vegan noodle Japanese restaurant shop, and another one is looking into, just because we did an automotive place before, he's looking into that. And so,
wow.
Yeah.
Cambodia is one of those countries that seems so abjectly poor, that it's got to be difficult because it doesn't seem like there's an infrastructure there economically for anything good to happen.
You brought up a good point. So a lot of people, when they hear about the eating of dogs, they think it's some poor custom. It's actually not. So in Cambodia, dog meat is the most expensive meat. It's a delicacy. And you can take this small, 1 ounce of it, and they make these soups out of it that feeds a whole family. And that's what people don't understand. sometimes I'll see these comments on our posts and they'll be like, well, you know, they have to eat something. You know, chicken or like these other animals are the cheapest, you see. And it's not to say that that's good to eat either. I'm just bringing up that thing. But also, it's the treatment of these dogs. You know, there's a place in Cambodia called Hot Pot Roll where they cut the dog's feet off and they literally just eat the feet. And they'll beat the animal up and they'll cut their feet off while they're still alive. And I actually rescued a few dogs from this place. And I have a dog from that same street that has no feet. And she is the most beautiful dog in the world. And we feel so lucky to have her in our life because every day, I always tell my kids this, that it's strange how an animal can get tortured. And you can rescue that animal and give that animal a new life and they will move forward and forgive. Where if you did that to a human being, they would be the angriest, most hateful person forever. And it just shows how much we have to learn from other species or how much there is to learn where people think we're so perfect or whatever. And, you know, we have a lot of room to grow. So
That's an extraordinary story. Yeah, we would be consumed by resentment, right?
Yeah.
If we had been tortured and mutilated that way. In this world of grim, there appears to be at least pockets of light when you go over there and close down a factory, when you bring these animals back. The publicity associated with it, which I think is important. It's important to get publicity on this. And I've seen some of it on network news and on the internet. Has that helped begin to raise a consciousness or change anything? Or is it just a process and we're just going to have to watch it happen slowly?
Well, you know, every country is different. So, number one, every country is different. I always have this belief that true change has to come from within. So the people of China, not Mark from America or not, you know, Chris DeRose from Last Chance for Animal, who's great, not their group from America, not Humane Society from America, but the true people in these countries are the ones who need to step up and push for change. And so on a small scale that's happening, the closing of these slaughterhouses and these restaurants, we do them because it gives hope to people who want the change. It shows that it's not impossible. However, the biggest change I've learned in time comes through legislation. If you make the eating of dogs illegal or you pass a cruelty law, because there's none in China, the amount of animals that are saved from a legislation like that is huge. And you talk about media and press and, you know, notoriety, there's not enough. There's not enough big names stepping up there and saying, enough, stop this. People coming together and saying why this shouldn't be done and offering solutions, because that's not happening. And right now we're working in China trying to create the first cruelty law with these NPC members. And we're having a hard time getting big name Chinese celebrities to support us. And China is such a strange, different, weird country where if you make mounting media pressure, the country will capitulate and be like, sure, you see. And I guess that's every country actually. So but China is very central, and so far to date there is no cruelty law. And every time I talk to the government in China, because we do communicate with the government, we've grown enough to have that relationship. They always tell me, Mark, you want to save animals, but our people are suffering. And what I tell them is this: is that animal legislation is an outline and a blueprint of how to behave, and it gives us this mold to working as people. People who burn animals alive or cut their feet off or hang them and brutalize them, and they laugh while they do this, they hurt people. You make this illegal, you put laws in place, that saves spousal abuse, child abuse, and it makes the country as a whole a nicer population, in my opinion. And I think, you know, and so that's kind of what we're doing.
Unquestionably, now it's been cited in study after study that the torturing of animals is a precursor to the torturing and killing of people. The matching of the statistics is undeniable. The mass shooter in Florida, they look back at his background, and he tortured and killed animals. So it's a decent point. It's interesting that your skill set has to be so broad in these efforts you're involved in, right? You have to be a strategist. You have to put this plan together to go over there to decide which places you're going to hit. And you have to be a diplomat because you have to interact with these various governments. And you have to be a little bit of a spy because you've gone undercover. I've seen the video and I've seen the work that you do. And even as you're repulsed and angered, you somehow have to continue with the operation. And I assume that, you were none of those things before this whole thing started.
When I started this, I only rescued cruelty cases from Los Angeles. And, when I first walked into a slaughterhouse, I couldn't believe that is what was happening. I was like, this can't be true. And in America, people go undercover into factory farms all the time. Chicken farms, Mercy for Animals, all these great groups, they literally go undercover. And when I looked at the dog meat trade, there were these slaughterhouses and no footage was being taken of what was happening. And it's not like I'm smart or anything. I just said, if I can do what these groups have done for pigs and cows and sheep and chicken, then maybe we have a chance. And so I started going with undercover cameras into these establishments, and we go when they're working, and I say, hey, my name is Thomas Yi, because that's the name I use out there, from New York, and I supply most of the Chinese restaurants, not to label, but that's just what I say, with dog meat, and I'd like to meet you and maybe work out some kind of trade agreement where I'm importing all this stuff from you. And so we go in when they're working, usually 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the morning, and they'll give us tours, and you'll be able to see what they're doing. They're beating these dogs up, hanging them, pulling them, kicking them, cutting their feet off, burning them alive. And, I try to always empathize and think my dogs who, any dog in America is lucky, who live in my house, who sleep on my bed, who literally I feel are my children. And I have 2 human children that say that that's my brother and my sister.
Sure. Our pets are family members.
Correct. And I try to think that if one day they were stolen, shipped on a truck or taken to some slaughterhouse, and they sat in a cage and watched everyone else being tortured and burned alive, and in their mind they would say, where is my father? Why hasn't he saved me? This is what they're doing there, and that's how crazy it is. And I got sidetracked earlier, but I was talking about this last Yulin. I was in the slaughterhouse. I'm in the rescuing these animals, and they were moving so fast because it's the night before Yulin, and they're trying to get all these restaurants, all this meat, and we're in there, and they're beating them up, they're hanging them, and they're cutting their skin off and ripping it alive, throwing the dog on the ground. And there was this dog that ran to my foot with no skin. I picked it up, and it was such in a state of shock, and I was in a state of shock that for some reason I remember it screaming, but it probably didn't. And it looked in my eyes, and you could see its eyelashes because he had no skin, but he had eyelashes, and then he died in my arms. And it was so heavy because at that moment I just thought, what happened if somebody did that to my children? And for many people, these animals are family members. Sorry. And it's tough out there. And, I have so much respect for the front ground activists who are fighting against this daily. I only fly in every so often and do this. And some people, this is what they're fighting against daily.
They, too, are battling these horribly emotional situations, and those on the front line looking into those animals' eyes. It's the case with all of these sentient creatures. They're all emotional. They feel fear. They feel pain. They feel loyalty. Those of us who've been around animals at all in your home, dogs, cats, you can tell they're lonely or they're excited when you're home, or all of these emotions, they are capable of feeling all of them. And when you look into that animal's eyes, that's suffering, as you say, at the hands of this system, it's horrifying. And And anybody who is on the front lines, and you can say, well, I just go in occasionally, but, you go into these, I mean, it's a firefight. It's like a soldier saying, well, I only go to Afghanistan. I've only been on 4 tours. When you're actually there, you are on the front lines. And on some level, that's why it's affected you so. But the stuff that's on YouTube, the videos that you've posted, the things that we're aware of, as a person watches them, you can't help but get the same feelings of emotion and of helplessness as you look at it. What can those of us who are not going to these places do? You've mentioned these laws in this country, the consuming of dogs. I mean, it's a start, I suppose, isn't it? How can we, on your website, is there information about that?
Yeah, animalhopeandwellness.org. I haven't been on there in a long time, so I don't really know. But I know, like, our director puts everything that we're working on there. How people can help is always an interesting question. People always contact me and they're like, hey, can I come with you to Yulin? Can I go with you into a slaughterhouse? People don't realize that it doesn't just work that way. It's much harder than just doing it. But
people say, can I come with you to a slaughterhouse? They want to help.
I think, like, it's so dark, and what they see is they see so much desperation, the same things that you and I see, and they feel compelled to make a difference. And so people do reach out and they offer their services quite often. But how we can help on a larger scale is opening our eyes. There's a concept called bearing witness, where it means that look at something, don't turn away, but be responsible to that being or that event and speak about it and share it. And so if you have a passion towards dogs and ending the dog meat trade, help us push this bill. Call your congressman. If you feel for pigs, which, go to a vigil that they have all over the world now. Don't eat those type of meats. Get involved in speaking out. And so I think the more people that raise awareness, the faster things change. I post these pretty graphic videos, and to me they're not graphic because the true graphic parts I take out, but a lot of people can't even watch that, and they say, I couldn't watch that. But share the video. Let someone who doesn't know this is happening find out. And in the end, there'll be 50 million people screaming and shouting, and that's when change happens. And until then, I guess people have to keep doing this and go back out there and try the best we can. And so
you were saying, these laws are on the books now in 44 states that permit people to eat dogs, and it's hard to get that legislation rolled back. Really? It's hard to get that legislation rolled back? Why is that? Who's the senator or congressman or governor or whomever who goes, you know what? Sorry, that dog eating thing, we want to hang on to it. We want to keep it legal.
So we're so it's funny how lucky we get as people or like a group or just as an individual. I didn't know anything about politics. And so one day I told my director and other people that work with me, I was like, I want to write a law that makes this illegal in our country. And so that's what we did. We hired a lawyer, we wrote this law, and then we got a lobbyist and we started lobbying. And so HR 1406, which is the Dog and Cat Meat Prohibition Act, was, we sponsored it and we're the main push behind it with all these other great individual activists who are helping. And so I started meeting these congressmen, and in the beginning I thought it was a no-brainer until I met the Agriculture Committee. So in Congress, there's something called the Ag Committee, which, if dogs and cats are made illegal to eat, that would be the first 2 species in American history that you cannot eat. You see, so it's going to prohibit the consumption of a full animal and a second animal, and they're worried about the slippery slope thing that next it's going to be ducks, sheep, pigs, horses. I know they defunded horse slaughter, but you can still technically eat horse. And so that's the pushback we're getting.
Wow. In a sense, it's the same thing that is right now so talked about in the culture with the NRA and with gun registration and legislation. It's that if we require anything, if we require a new age limit for a gun, that's the beginning of all these requirements, and soon we'll be getting these guns, and so the gun lobby cares about that. In this case, the ag lobby, the agricultural lobby associated with livestock, says no. Once they start prohibiting the consumption of one, it's before you know it, they'll be prohibiting pigs and cows and I mean, that's wild. Now that you say it, it makes total sense. But from the outside looking in, I'm like, what's the big deal? Let's just, and in America, that has to poll 99% of the people would want that law on the books.
You know, if you think about it, dogs in our society are so different now. They go to war with us. They sniff out cancer. They help us with our emotions. They're support dogs. They go into hospitals and spread joy. And then there are family members. And if you can't even protect them, you know, people, a species which, you know, all species should be equal, but a species that we've elevated so high in our culture, it's like, it's crazy. Everything's so political. It's like, just do something because it's good and it's supposed to be done.
Yeah, because it's right.
Because it's right. Correct.
My cat people, of which I am one, will not be happy with me if I don't ask you, what about cats? I'd heard that they use cats as well.
So this law that we have, H.R. 1406, it's actually called the Dog and Cat Meat Prohibition Act.
Thank you.
And to speak about that, I've stopped trucks in China that are carrying 200 to 300 cats, 400 cats. And so we, you know, even though the cats aren't emphasized as much because there's no cat meat festival, but we rescue them too. And we've brought back cats that have been beaten. There's this cat that's waiting to come back. They cut all the toenails. I mean, like literally cut the paws off, but it still has a foot of all of the feet. And it's like, why would you do that? And it just doesn't make sense that these things are happening. And
the cats are part of the mix
correct.
As well.
They're part of the mix as well. And the laws we're trying to make in these countries
will include cats.
Will include cats, yes.
The Yulin Festival, how many times a year does the Yulin Festival happen, or when does it happen?
It's once a year on June 21st every single year.
And how long does it last?
Well, the celebration is really on the 21st, and there's kind of like a gathering leading up to that. So it predates that by 3 days, and then it lasts a few days after. But the main event is on the 21st. And so these people literally fly in and drive into Yulin, which is a small city, and they celebrate the eating of dogs.
That's what the festival is. It's not like, it's almost like if you had a big lobster eating festival.
That's what the festival is, correct. It's about like bringing in the summer. So it's like the summer solstice, and they eat lychee and dogs.
So that's important. In other words,
kind of like Thanksgiving.
I was just about to say it's like Thanksgiving. Correct. Thank you. I literally was just about to say that. So you can hang a bunch of other stuff around it, but at the core of Thanksgiving is turkey, 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 turkey.
Which is terrible, too.
Which is awful. I mean,
awful.
Turkeys are, we've talked about it on this show. They were noble creatures, noble animals. Benjamin Franklin wanted turkeys to be the national bird in this country.
Yeah, it should be. Maybe we can do right in the future for all those turkeys that died.
Yeah,
they could become the national bird. So
anyway, that's what Yulin is. It's got that quality of solstice around it, but really it's this dog meat festival.
Yeah, it's a dog meat eating festival. I just want to say this, and one of the last things, a lot of people, when they hear about these things, they're very angry towards Asian people. It doesn't mean that this represents the whole country or even the ideology of most Asian people. Just like in America, you know, gun violence, drugs, what have you. No country is perfect. And so I hope soon that these countries take action to reform or create animal legislation and ban the torturing of animals, because just a straight overt torturing of an animal, saying like, I'm going to hang this dog and I'm going to beat it until it can't live and crush all its ribs and skin them alive, just because there's no law and it makes me feel good or it makes my food taste better. And that should be illegal in every single place on earth, even America.
The torturing of dogs, that is illegal in this country, is it not?
Well, so in working with this bill, we've talked to different congressmen and even the AG about it, and they had said, well, you can't torture a dog to begin with. But if I come from China or any country that this is part of my tradition and I get a dog, I'm going to do my traditional thing. I'm going to torture that dog. And so while it might be illegal here, if it's being done in my backyard, who's going to know, you know? And so just because you can't abuse a dog doesn't mean it's not happening in the process of eating dog meat.
So you're saying essentially in these cultural pockets that exist throughout this country, these pockets that have this tradition, they are torturing and eating dogs alive, even in this country.
There was a recent case in Hawaii, which is part of the United States, where somebody was golfing and had their dog just going in to get their clubs. So their dog was left up by a tree, and you know, the leash was on the tree, and someone stole that dog, tied the dog up, cut off its feet, and the dog was rescued after, tortured that dog, and the dog still survived. But that's why the dog meat movement there is so like they hate it, because they're doing that to their pets, and that shouldn't be allowed.
I want to go back to your last statement just to put a point on it. You're saying, look, even in Asia, there's a plurality of opinion on this. It's not like every Asian person is into this. In fact, it's not even the majority of Asian people. But nonetheless, this is a real tradition that enjoys great popularity, but it by no means enjoys popularity throughout the entire country with every Asian family.
Dog meat and the cruelty and the torture and the violence that goes into this industry and this kind of cultural thing, it's dying, meaning that the younger generation, people like, 14, 15, 20s, they see it is wrong and they're speaking out. They're not speaking out in enough volume to change things yet, but no. And even some older people, China actually has a largest growing pet population. And so these people actually love animals. And if you love a dog, why would you torture that dog? And so things are changing, and, where there's darkness and evil, there's love and hope. And so
the work you do is remarkable. I mean, I've learned a lot just in this short time that we've been talking. We'll have a link to your website, the Animal Hope and Wellness Foundation. It'll be on our website if you're listening in all the different ways on iHeartRadio. Go to edge-show.com, edge-show.com, and you'll see the hot link. But I want to mention the name of the organization again. It's Animal Hope and Wellness Foundation, and you can find that organization at animalhopeandwellness.org, animalhopeandwellness.org. Marc Ching's work, a lot of where the legislation sits, a lot of what's going on, information about the cat and dog meat trade. It's all there on the website.
And dogs and cats who need homes, who have been tortured and survived. And so if you are looking to adopt, it's amazing how compassionate an animal who's gone through such a great ordeal is and how much they teach you. And so, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's one thing to close these down, but you do come back to this country with all of these animals that are looking for a home. And you can find information and you can connect with Marc and his organization and the Animal Hope and Wellness Foundation and connect with those animals at his website. Marc, thank you.
Thanks, Marc.
Good luck. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please recommend it to others. But more than anything, just appreciate you being here and giving it a listen. Until next time, bye-bye.
Get more of The Edge on Stitcher and iTunes, or go to our website, edge-show.com.
edge-show.com.